A word from our sponsors. Whether or not Google ever decides to deprecate cookies, they continue to loom over us, putting future revenue growth in doubt. LiveIntent's Hero, Helping Identity Reveal Opportunity, offers a solution by transforming non-addressable audiences into addressable inventory using first-party data. Hero is scalable, interoperable, and integrated with major industry players, providing a robust framework for navigating the post-cookie era. See how Hero can help you quickly unlock your inventory at LiveIntent/Hero. That's LiveIntent/HIRO. Welcome to the AdTechGod Pod, your window into the world of advertising technology and the people behind it. I'm your host, AdTechGod. Welcome back to another episode of the AdTechGod Pod, the podcast where we meet some of the industry's leading marketers. Today's guest is Josh Palau. He is a seasoned marketer and has a ton of experience spanning some of the world's most iconic brands, including Johnson & Johnson, Disney, Comcast, Bayer, and LendingTree. Josh is currently leading performance marketing at Pfizer, where he's applying his vast expertise in one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. With a track record of leveraging data, creative thinking, and a passion for connecting with consumers, Josh's insights are invaluable. I'm personally a huge fan of Josh, and I'm super excited to meet him today. Josh, welcome to the AdTechGod Pod.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited about this. I feel like I've graduated up to like another level of podcast guests.
You know, Josh, I've followed you for a long time. We've interacted on LinkedIn. Obviously, I'm familiar with your work at Pfizer, and when you joined, I was super excited to see that happen. But thank you for being here, and thanks for all your support.
Yeah, no doubt.
So, Josh, you know, you just got back from Cannes, and this will be recording a few weeks after this. How was your overall experience there, and what do you think?
I thought it was great. So there's a running joke about me that, which by the way, it's probably in my own head. No one's talking about me in this way. I've done this for 25 years. I've never gone to Cannes, to South by, to CES, and I'm completely fine with it. And this year we sent a very small group of people there, very just like get some good strategic meetings going with people we can't always see. I got there and I was like, oh, I kind of get it now. Like I get the level of connectivity, the side meetings that just happen out of nowhere, the people that you have access to that just you don't see all the time. And you know, we're a big giant brand with, you know, the good budget. We can get meetings with lots of people, but the carve out of time that senior leaders make to meet with us to talk about our challenges and how we're trying to address them, I thought that was the biggest takeaway for me. It was like, I get it. I see a lot of the value in what I saw there. The other thing is, and you know this, like to me, all of these things are like a high school reunion, but I'm actually popular. And so it's just nice to run into a lot of like friends and connections who I just haven't seen. And some of it's business and some of it's not. But I think the thing that's amazing about ad tech is the connections and friendships that you make. And I think that's what kind of keeps me going.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel that way at every event. It's nice to just run into people and, you know, the high five and the hug and how are you doing? Haven't seen you in months. Want to grab a bite to eat, want to grab a coffee, want to grab a drink. It's just fun to see everybody and hang out in a non-office environment. And I think that's why, you know, events are so good and so much fun. Josh, I start every podcast the same way. I wanted to ask you, you know, how you got into marketing, how you got into ad tech. Can you give us and the listeners a little bit of a background of how you started as the, you know, heading performance marketing at Pfizer?
Yeah, there's two parts of the story. I'm going to skip to the end for a second, which is I've been fortunate to have roles at both like agency, client side, and at one point very early in my career, which I'll get to in a second, I was on the sales side. So I've also had this desire to get like whatever the ad tech version of an EGOT is, you know, where you get the Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony. Like I got to figure out how to do that. And so like while I've spent all of my career on the agency and client side, I got to get to a tech platform one of these days. And I'm hoping that like Jeff Green will maybe just like sign me to a 1-day contract and I could just get in, retire, and then I'll have completed the full circle. But I think what it speaks to is a young Josh Palau was going to be a teacher, grew up in Manhattan, Lower East Side, went to college in Charlotte, North Carolina, and thought I'm going to be a teacher because it's what I wanted to do. Ended up just graduating with a history degree, minor in Afro-American studies, because I did not realize I had to take education classes until my sophomore year. And so I was like, let me get out. Ended up, graduating, figured I'd try to go like the graduate school, private school teaching route, ended up back home and ended up, in New York. And then over time, the internet came about. And that's the interesting thing, when you think about some of these stories and I look at my kids growing up, it's like when I was in college, none of this existed. And even when I graduated, none of it existed. So I was working some just, local desk job at a gym. And then eventually, internet comes up. Ad sales is, the big thing that everybody's getting into. You don't need experience because nobody has it. And so I had my first sales job at Hearst New Media. It was home arts. And I loved it. It was a great experience. I think I was there for maybe 2 years. And then all the .coms started blowing up in good ways. So then I went to go work at about.com. And that was like one of the best experiences I've ever had. The industry was at a great point. I met amazing people there that I've still, kept in touch with or seen how their careers have grown. And then, by the way, like I was actually pretty good at it. But what I also say to people, because they're like, why did you move from that into these marketing and client side roles? Is I said, while I thought I was good at it, and I probably was to a degree, selling banners in the 90s and the 2000s was like selling crack in the 80s. You sort of good personality, decent product, like you're going to do okay. I will say also, though, I've some of my, best friendships that I've had in this industry were started in that sales role. So over time, what happened with me is I just got to a point where the decisions clients were making became less about the publisher audience or what we could offer. The bottom fell out. This is just where 9/11. It was who had the lowest CPM, who had the largest amount of impressions. I started getting this itch of like, I want to know why those decisions get made and why people don't do some of the things that I think make sense. And so I got a job at J&J working in their actually medical device division as an e-marketer, and the business card had the E in front of it. And it was actually very little, if any, media at all, because the products that we were marketing were physician based. I mean, they're products that if you're getting them as a patient, like you have no choice. It's a hospital contract. And so it did teach me a lot about, though, like the inner workings of companies, how to sort of navigate them, how to get things done in a conservative environment. I think I played a lot on the experience of just, new industry, new category. Everything was getting bigger. So then, went from there, had a short stint at Disney where I thought, and this is, by the way, this is the litmus test. So I thought I could get back into sales, got back into sales and found out, wow, it's really hard right now. And maybe I'm not that good. And so going back to my sales days, my biggest client was iFrontier out of Philly. And I reached out to the founder, Brad Aronson, who's a wonderful human being. And he's like, what do you know about SEO? I said, absolutely nothing, but give me a week. I'll learn and I'll come in. And I got a role there, which then blossomed into this amazing role for 6 years of leading the search practice across the US. If we're doing like a Taylor Swift callback, like Razorfish is definitely the asylum I was raised in, but like the most wonderful asylum ever. I didn't realize it at the time, but I look at the caliber of people I worked with and I see where their careers have gone, Heimlich, Greitzer, like all these people who I was like, wow, I worked with these people and somehow like more or less held my own. But it was just a great experience because also, and I, don't know enough about you, but like, I know, the history of ad tech, like it was at a time where everything wasn't commoditized. Everything wasn't, the same thing over and over again. Like we won on people. We won just because we were smarter, more fun to work with. We had a good idea because we weren't the cheapest. And I really, truly enjoyed that experience. I'll fast forward to just get ahead on the rest of it. But same itch happened in addition to the fact that I was traveling an insane amount of time where, again, I found clients, again, making decisions, trying to figure out why, what was the reason. And so I ended up with a job at Comcast leading their sort of digital sales channel, which at the time Comcast did very little online. And I remember meeting with the COO of Comcast. I mean, that's a big, by the way, I tell people all the time, like I was qualified for the job, but I should not have gotten that job. I mean, I was a VP at an agency, which no disrespect, 6 years of working there. Like I was not VP caliber of a Comcast, but my search knowledge is what got me there because they were so dependent on search. And it was just very interesting to meet the COO of this, giant cable corporation who understood that, like we have not paid attention to the online channel and we haven't because, and I remember the little quote, he's like, we make billions off of you calling us and nobody wants to mess with that. And so he was like, I feel like you can mess with that. So joined, stood up what I think in the early days would have been called an in-house practice of just getting like all the strategy internal and running that for a while. From there, moved to J&J, back to my healthcare roots on consumer health, went to Bayer, which is really like probably the thing most people remember me for, which is we did a giant in-housing project there. And then eventually LendingTree, and then now over to Pfizer. And I skipped through the end kind of quickly, but because I think there's a common thread in that, God, which is like, I get these jobs where like there's something broken, there's something wrong. The companies are great. I mean, I just rattled off giant companies that are doing quite well. but there's something about how they're managing their media, how they're taking their approach to marketing, how they're leveraging these digital channels. And so I somehow have ended up in these like areas where the company's doing well, but there's some broken parts, or the company's not doing so well. And like the broken parts are becoming more apparent. And so I get to come in and sort of like a fix it like capacity. And I enjoy that. It's like getting to fix things and build things without having to go start my own thing is something that, you and I were talking prior to this podcast. Like I never wanted to own my own agency, despite, people telling me you should open up your own shop. Never wanted to do it. I feel fortunate enough that like I've gotten to do aspects of it, and I got to do a lot of it there without having to go out on my own, because that's terrifying to me.
I think in general, there's people with different types of personalities. Some people have, your type of personality, which is I enjoy fixing what's broken. I enjoy kind of like patching up those cracks and making it better so it operates better. I've worked with people like that in the past where we're, pretty calm, pretty collected, understand the industry really well, kind of know that revenues are growing, but they also can see where the cracks are and where it might become a pain point in the future. It's almost like a weird, like visionary type of mentality where they're able to totally kind of dissect what the issue is and adjust to not make it a big problem in the future. Because it might not be a problem today, but it might be a problem 2 years from now. It's just, you're probably your personality type. Your personality type is like, hey, I like to see where the issues are, big or small, patch them up, and we can move on and continue to grow so it doesn't impact us later.
Yeah, totally. Totally fits my skill set.
So, working at a pharmaceutical company must be very different and very, I guess, challenging when it comes to data compliance and regulation that exists in our industry. What do you feel is kind of like a challenge for you at Pfizer or maybe even at Johnson & Johnson that you feel has helped you not only understand the industry better, but really help the companies you worked at grow?
Yeah, I think a lot of it revolves around privacy and targeting, because that's at the underpinning of a lot of our industry is around this promise of finding the right consumer and hitting them with the right message at the right time. And I think we have lots of examples of companies that do that quite well. And I think obviously healthcare companies being more conservative, they're careful with that, they're more thoughtful about it, partly because that's just in the DNA of a healthcare company, partly because, and if we're using some Pfizer experience, I mean, some of our products are things that, if you're taking them, you're going through something pretty troubling right now. And I think that's where the whole thought process around when you're working under that sort of umbrella, and even back to the consumer health days, I mean, these were not life-threatening categories, but our products were things that that were personal to you. You had a sort of a higher bar, I think, of being able to say, we have to be able to find these people, get the right message to them, get them into the stores, but we have to do it in a way that's thoughtful. Whereas when I was at LendingTree, we were focused on finding people with good credit scores, obviously in a legal, privacy compliant way. It was different, and in this regard, there's a more sort of like finite window, or more of a window you want to look at in terms of how you actually approach those things. And so I think that's given me some perspective on what you can and can't do. But I also think, just going back to your comment about my personality that I do appreciate, it's also like, where also can we challenge? And so, when we look at all the state privacy laws that are coming out now, like we're examining them, we're figuring them out, we're doing what makes the most sense. It's a challenge of like, is that something we have to do? Can we at least ask the question? I know we've done this in the past. We might not have done a tagging thing in the past, but like, can we rethink these things? In the end of it all, like, yes, like we have a product to sell, which, by the way, every single company does. So that's at the heart of what all companies do. Our products, though, again, if you're taking them, you're suffering through something, some of it life-threatening, some of it not so life-threatening, but it still matters to you. And I think that's, to me, the sort of greater purpose of, we have what's the expression I hate, shareholder value to pay attention to. But in the end, like, we want the patient to get the information to make the right decision. And that's what it boils down to.
I think also, like, something that we don't consider often is, we talk about the impact of data compliance, regulation change in our industry, but at least in my world, it's mostly around the tech companies, right? Like, how is this going to impact our offering to marketers? Or how is this going to impact the revenues to publishers? But something we don't think about is, how is this going to impact marketers? At least not for me, because that's not the world I've lived in. So for me, it's looking at working at a pharmaceutical company and understanding those restrictions and those barriers that you have to grow your marketing efforts and to grow your performance. It must be a challenge, right? Like, you can target anyone you want with diapers. Doesn't matter. Now, you probably want to target someone who needs diapers, or the household that wants diapers. But there's no major regulation around, hey, you served it to someone who doesn't have kids at all. That's just wasted dollars. That's not necessarily breaking a law. But with pharmaceutical products, it must be very different because those restrictions are there.
Yeah. And that's why, that's why I said it's a matter of just being thoughtful around like what you do. And so what others would call slow moving, conservative, I don't disagree sometimes in that descriptor. I think some of it is actually like, it's also like a thoughtfulness. And I want to be like very blunt about, I don't think it's a thoughtfulness because we're afraid of a privacy law. Yes, we pay attention to that. I'm saying that I think our approach is this right for the consumer? Is this right to help that patient or that healthcare provider get the information they need? Yes, we have to comply with everything else, but I think it just requires a thoughtfulness to what you're sort of putting out there, because I always would make this comment to people that like whatever new industry thing like kicked in. And like, I remember years ago when it's like, oh, like we could send a text alert to somebody in a store when they're near Tylenol. And it's like, oh, as a marketer, I love that. As a consumer, I hate that. And I think there's that balance of like what I love in my job versus what I don't love if I was a consumer.
Yeah, you're right. You're like, that's a little creepy. Like we know exactly where they're standing. Great way to target them. That's for sure. But yeah, you're right. I guess the consumer reaction to that type of targeting could be looked at pretty negatively. I know a car dealership near my house a few years ago would text you when you pull in. So you would pull in, you'd get a text like, hey, we know you're waiting in line for your oil change. I'm like, this is kind of weird. You saw me literally pull in like 30 seconds at the stoplight. Like you were able to see where I was at and ping me. But that's different because I was heading there anyway. What do you think of the industry, coming back and working at Cannes and having all your meetings? Like, what do you see as really positive and positively trending in marketing, in ad tech, in the next, 12 to 18 months?
So starting with marketing, I would say, I think there's sort of I don't know if it's renewed, but I feel like we're talking a lot more about the creative. And I don't think it's an AI thing. And I don't want to even talk about AI. I think we're having more conversations around the creative. I feel like we've gotten somewhat over that hump. We're still not there of like, there's only so much targeting and so much buying I can do. If the creative's no good, I used to say like, look, I can't outperform crappy creative. And so I think there was a lot of talk around like, how do we get there? But what I thought was a little bit different this time around was it was sort of right message, right moment conversations, but it wasn't the over architecting of like, let's create 50 different cells around every single audience you might be going after. It was more of like, how do we get to a level of customization that covers the bulk of what you're trying to reach or the bulk of the consumers you're trying to reach, and then create them by some moments. But we don't necessarily need to have like, if you're targeting athletes, we don't need a piece of creative that is surfer, runner, rock climber, weekend warrior. Like we can do something a little bit more targeted, but at a higher level. So I feel like there was a lot of a good conversation there. Another one, and this was specific to us, is how do you help us measure? Because there are ways to measure healthcare in our world. Again, I'll keep saying privacy compliant just so a gaggle of lawyers don't show up at my desk. But how do you help us with that measurement? And there's partners that we're working with to help us get there, because in the end, all the healthcare companies have learned that for as much mass reach as you can do back in the day with television, and where it worked, it's a competitive space now. And you know what? If I'm not measuring those business outcomes and optimizing to those, it's harder unless you have a blockbuster. Ozempic is in advertising. Like they're doing just fine on their own. I think others have to play in that space a little bit more. So I think those were two of the big things I was thinking through. Talked to a couple of the retail partners. I still think they're struggling with measurement, but I think that the way they're again trying to approach the data that's accessible to them in terms of reaching your audience, I thought, I feel like they've progressed a little bit. I think, video is something we're thinking a lot about, but not in the old school linear sense, the way Pfizer used to. And we're thinking about how do we do it in certain fashions that help us sort of, again, reach that right audience, whether it's patient or healthcare provider. How do we do it in the right way? But also, how do we do it efficiently? And so there was a lot of conversation with video providers just around like how they're thinking about those audiences and reaching them. So I thought that was another one that I thought was pretty interesting. But, there's also this whole supply side piece that's kicking in now and we've heard it from some partners. I'm sure you've heard it too about, bypassing a DSP and just coming direct to us. I think I get some of those conversations because of the whole in-housing thing. There were some interesting conversations. I don't know if we're there yet. But I think at the heart of, I know what you dig at when, with the education you give to our industry is around like, are we just hurting ourselves again? Like, I mean, I appreciate a company that wants to help me be more efficient. And I'm not saying that, we should just live in the ecosystem of just the Trade Desk and DV and Yahoo and, these other providers. Are we just trying to find ways to take down other partners in our industry that just ultimately isn't going to lead to a good end, because it's either mass unemployment or a big step backwards in terms of innovation?
I'm so torn on that topic. Sometimes I get it. Like, if you have the platform and you have the buying mechanism, then you might as well make that available to buyers, right? Are you targeting some sort of niche client or marketer that maybe like the big DSP might not go after? That's fine too. Is it incremental new revenue for your publisher? So as an SSP, do you want to bring them on and go to your publisher and say, hey, this is super exclusive. This is just with us. It's new for you. I think the challenge is like when the DSPs are going after publishers directly and circumventing the SSPs, fine. And when the SSPs are now, trying to go direct to marketers and skipping over the DSP, fine. I just wonder whether it's the right way or not. But I guess for me, I get it. Everybody needs to show growth. They need to show revenue growth. The market is continuing to grow in specific verticals like, connected television and retail media. And people are looking for new dollars and faster than, I guess, economic growth rates. So if we're growing at 5% or 10%, they want to show 30% to their investors. So I get it. They're trying to squeeze out as many dollars as they can. I just don't know how it's going to end up. It's interesting to watch, though.
Oh, yeah. And then just one last note on that. I think, my sarcasm, but yet how I feel, like, I think shareholder value drives us down these paths. And again, I don't know if it's good for the industry, if it's just good for a company. I do struggle with that one. And again, it's us trying to figure out how we sort of patch our new setup together. Like I have to look at all these opportunities, but there's a part of me that wonders, is it worth it? Is it worth a couple of pennies to what it could do from a management standpoint or just frankly an industry standpoint?
Yeah. And sometimes I think of it like there's a stat that's in market and I read a lot of really random stuff sometimes. The average CEO is like 10 years, 6 or 7 years, I think. So if you think about it, they're looking for short-term gains. They're not necessarily looking for the 30-year game anymore. Like back in the day, you'd have CEO of British Petroleum or Chevron is there for 22 years. They were looking for long-term sustainable growth. Now I'm not sure. Like I think they're looking for growth while they're in office, really. And it makes me wonder whether these decisions are positive in the short term, but not so positive, down the line. But, who am I? I'm just going to listen and watch and see what happens.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you.
I think this is important just from your perspective and where you sit on the marketing side. What advice would you give to the audience? Like, what is the final thought that you'd like to give to everyone who's working in the industry, working as a marketer, working in ad tech that you think would be helpful?
I think the biggest thing, and let me do a quick caveat. I know how hard sales is right now. Like, there's no doubt about it, how tough it is. And I know the calls that people get. And I had people who will call me and say, hey, is there any chance you could just take a meeting with us? I mean, I know you probably not do anything, but it would go a long way internally, and I'll happily do it. With all that being said, for me, what's always resonated with me with partners, and I'm very, this is going to sound very self-serving, or maybe not self-serving, maybe sound a little conceited. I hate the word vendors. I've worked with vendors, but I'm big on partners. I'm big on partners a little bit because they help me with my day job of making sure we're doing the right things. And when things go sideways, they're there to support and help me. Personally, I love my partners because when the next gig comes around or the next idea that I have, they're going to help me vet it out. And so I just think relationships matter so much. And so I think that's part of it. Is my advice to folks is learn about the people you're pitching as best you can. I mean, there's only so much you could learn about us. I mean, I had somebody the other day who came with a great presentation that was focused on one of our consumer brands, of which Pfizer does not have anymore. And they just didn't know we got rid of that business. And I said, don't worry about it. I'm glad you did homework, at least to make this presentation custom. And I really, truly mean that. But I think there's enough information out there to get a little more targeted in your approach. Ask lots of questions. I mean, look, clients aren't great. Sometimes we don't have time. We don't want to answer a lot of questions, but I do think if you can get those questions, if you can ask the questions about what's needed, then the biggest thing, or not the biggest thing, I guess the last thing is, get to the heart of the value you bring to the conversation. Because we spend a lot of time with a lot of partners, and this is just in general, who talk about size of what they do, the audiences, the logos on the slide of who they work with. But how do you help me with my business? And how do you help me solve my business problem? I've always come back to that. Like, what problem are we trying to solve? And if you can help me solve it, I'll spend all my money with you. And if you can't, then let's just like make that decision and move on. So I think it's about the relationship. If I had to sum it all up, I'd say that.
I love that. But I think that value prop sales pitch is important. And the relationship part, I think, is so huge. I think, the door's usually open for anyone to come in and talk. But if you come in with a pretty weak offering, like you said, a slide with 57 logos, cool, congratulations, but none of them do what we do. And how are you going to help us? I think that's super valuable to salespeople.
And honestly, like I've never worked in another industry, so I can't say that other industries aren't amazing. But I have friends who do, and I don't know. Like I don't want to make blanket statements, but like I just feel like our industry, like I've watched people I've argued with or like had really bad disagreements with, and see them like a year later or 2 years later, we're in a different place, and I'll own my part of like a bad relationship, but it goes very quickly. Like, hey, we get it. We're all in the same sort of thing. And I think it is the madness that is this industry because it is unlike any other. And so I think there's something to the relationship aspect that it pays dividends down the road.
So my next question for you is, and I love this one because my favorite answer ever were the Vanderhook brothers. And so I'm going to ask you this question. What controversial hill are you willing to die on today, Josh?
So I don't know if it's controversial, but I do. But my hill for a while outside, well, it was in housing forever, and it still is. But my controversial hill, this whole separation of brand and performance. So when I got the call about this role, they told me the title was performance media, and now it's Pfizer. It was an interesting job, so like I wasn't going to hang up the phone just based on that. But my first question was, am I only in charge of the paid channels and of the subset of the paid channels? Am I only in charge of the ones that drive sales? Now I knew the sales modeling was convoluted here, so it wasn't as direct response as it was at LendingTree. But I asked that question because I wanted to have at least some, not oversight, but I at least wanted a voice into how we're doing our video, our TV, and just in the general of how it fits in the entire construct. I mean, we're a very collaborative team here. I don't own all the channels, but the answer was no. It's all channels. Again, you have an agency that's going to be doing your linear television, and they're going to be making, some pretty like direct recommendations. But I watch brands separate those two things. My little soundbite has always been everything is performance. It just depends on how you measure it and what your expectation is of it. So don't expect the same thing out of linear as you do out of search, but don't pretend like that's just focused on brand. I mean, building your brand leads to performance. I mean, I've worked at J&J. I can tell you right now, like you build that brand and you get performance out of it. I worked at Comcast, and as much as you try to build that brand, you're still a hated company. And by the way, I think there's a lot of good things that they're doing. You could win despite that, but I think building the brand is important, and I think it does have an impact on performance. So don't treat them separately. Don't put them in separate buckets.
I love that. A new part of the podcast recently over the last 4 or 5 episodes has been me having you review a couple questions and ask the guests. And the one that you picked is one that's not picked often, which is, what is the kindest thing someone has done for you? So I'm curious, Josh, what is the nicest thing that someone has done for you?
Yeah. And I would say it goes beyond, it's not a someone, it's a something, and that's this industry. So many people, a lot of people who know me know that every year I do I take part in a charity fundraiser that my wife runs for the St. Baldrick's Foundation, which is focused on funding research specific for pediatric cancer. It is not something that companies focus on. And so that's St. Baldrick's mission. And so every year I shave my head, which everybody thinks is like, wow, you shave your head. Again, I'm blessed with a nice head of hair, but it comes back very quickly. But every year I put it out there. I email people. I put stuff on social media. And every year this industry and the friendships in this industry delivers. And I mean, to the point where I have to do the numbers, but I mean, I've raised a significant amount of money in the 10 years that we've done this. And what I say to people is I have got some partners who over the years, a good, nice, big chunk of a donation. But every year when I download the spreadsheet to go look and see, okay, who do I have to send thank yous to? It's a series of 50, 100, 200, 250 donations. It's not 10 donations from some big giant corporations who are trying to win my business. It's people in our industry who are saying, you know what, Josh is doing something good. He's done this forever. It's the most meaningful thing I've ever done in my life. I mean, it's as far as especially when I weigh it against my career, but I always say that, I love how this industry just shows up and understand that look, it's tough for all people. We're pretty blessed in this industry in terms of like what we get to play with and some of the money that's, we're able to make if we're at the right places. And just to be able to give that back, we'll be remembered more for the things we've done for people, whether it's give of your time, give of your money, than we will for the efficiencies I drove by bringing the media team in-house at Bayer. And so I think that's just a lasting thing that I'll always remember about this industry.
Awesome. Josh, that actually brings us to the end of the podcast. And I want to thank you and thank Pfizer for having you here today. This was super insightful. So thank you again for joining me.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the AdTechGod Pod, a podcast for the people about the people that make AdTech great. Stay connected with me for more insights, trends, and interviews in the realm of AdTech. Don't miss out on our latest updates, so follow me on X, Instagram, and connect with me on LinkedIn. Don't forget, ATG Slack community has insights, networking opportunities, and jobs. Keep the conversation going and stay at the forefront of AdTech innovation.